I didn't think I did anything wrong. I just laughed and said my ex needed 2 hands, while my husband barely needed a finger. It was a joke, that's all. But then the papers came, real legal papers, and suddenly I was the one begging for answers. My name is Isolde Maris, and I am 33 years old, and if you ask me, I really do not think I did anything wrong. I was just being funny, just making light of things the way I always do. Daniel, my husband, has always been so serious, so heavy with everything, and sometimes I feel like I need to remind him that life is not such a big deal. We have been married for 8 years, 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, and everyone keeps saying we are stable, lucky, blessed. But to me, it feels more like I am carrying the fun part of the marriage, and he is dragging me down with his moods. I work as an administrative assistant in a small firm, nothing glamorous, but I like the routine, and I like the gossip at the office. That is where Gareth showed up, a new hire with quick jokes and easy charm, the kind of man who pays attention. At first it was harmless, but then I started comparing the two, and it was hard not to notice how dull Daniel seemed in comparison. The big fight that everyone keeps talking about, the one that turned my world upside down, started at a family barbecue. I made a joke, a private kind of joke, about how my ex needed both hands, while Daniel barely needed a finger. People laughed, some were embarrassed, but I was just trying to lighten the mood. Daniel looked like I had punched him in the chest. He walked out without a word, and I felt like the entire yard was staring at me like I was the villain. Even my own sister Clara whispered that I had gone too far, but my parents rolled their eyes and said Daniel was too sensitive. His mother Evelyn, though, she looked at me like I had set fire to the family. The thing is, I did not see it as cruel. I thought of it as honesty wrapped in humor, something couples should be able to handle. If you cannot laugh about little things, then what do you have? That has always been my logic, and I stood by it even as Daniel moved into the guest room and started avoiding me. I told myself he was sulking, that he needed time, that he would eventually realize I was right and come back around. What I did not realize then was that he was not sulking at all. He was planning. He was collecting things, writing things down, talking to people I did not even know he spoke to. While I was brushing him off and rolling my eyes, he was putting together something much bigger than an argument. I thought I was clever. I thought I was still in control. Looking back now, I see that was the moment everything started to slip out of my hands. The night it all really began was supposed to be simple. Daniel had suggested we have a few people over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just some neighbors and my sister Clara with her boyfriend. I agreed because honestly, I like being the one who entertains. I like the house filled with voices and laughter, people seeing what I have built, even if Daniel is the one who pays most of the bills. That night, the kids were in the living room playing, while the adults gathered around the table. Daniel cooked because he insists on doing it better than me, and I let him, because why not? It makes me look good. Everyone was drinking wine, conversations bouncing from work stories to neighborhood gossip, and I was in my element, smiling, talking, keeping things lively. Daniel, as usual, sat mostly quiet, nodding when asked something, barely contributing. He has this way of folding into himself, like he is doing us a favor by even being present, and it drives me crazy. When I saw him staring into his glass again, I felt that irritation build. I threw him a couple of looks across the table, the kind meant to say lighten up, join in, stop killing the mood. He just looked down. It was embarrassing. People were laughing about vacations. Someone told a joke about a disastrous road trip, and I, trying to keep the mood alive, decided to pull Daniel in by teasing. I leaned forward and said with a laugh that Daniel could not even handle the drive to my parents' house without getting lost. And then, because the wine had loosened my tongue, I added that he was so quiet, you would think he was mute unless a computer was in front of him. People chuckled. Even Clara laughed. And for a moment I felt satisfied. Daniel gave a stiff smile but did not say much. That should have been the end of it, but I never know when to stop. I thought if I kept joking, he might finally snap into the conversation. So I told a story about how, back when I was younger, my ex once insisted he could open a pickle jar with one hand, while Daniel had to bang it against the counter for 5 minutes. Everyone laughed louder, and I laughed too, but Daniel's face changed. He went pale, set down his fork, and excused himself from the table. He did not slam anything, did not yell, just walked out to the porch. That silence hit the group like a slap. Clara gave me this sharp look and whispered that I should go talk to him, but I shrugged it off. I said he always gets like that, too sensitive, too serious. My parents shook their heads like Daniel was being dramatic. Evelyn, his mother, who had joined us that evening, did not laugh. She looked me dead in the eye and said coldly that I should be careful with my words. I rolled my eyes because really, how could she take his side over something so harmless? After a few minutes, Daniel came back in, face calm, but his eyes were flat. He finished dinner with barely a word. When everyone left, I asked if he was mad. He said he was tired. That was it. I tried to press him, saying he embarrassed me by sulking in front of everyone, that it was just a joke, but he only repeated he was tired and went to bed early. I was annoyed, thinking he would snap out of it by morning. The next day, he was polite, but distant. He made breakfast for the kids, got them ready for school, and barely looked at me. When I asked if he was going to work late, he said yes without detail. I told him he needed to stop acting like I had done something unforgivable, because all I did was lighten the mood, and people actually laughed. He said nothing. That night, Clara called me and said I had gone too far with the jar story, that it sounded mean, not funny. I defended myself. I told her Daniel needs to toughen up and stop acting like a child, that marriages need humor, and she just sighed. My parents, when I complained, told me Daniel had always been too quiet, and that maybe he should learn not to let little things bother him. That fed my ego. I convinced myself I was right, that the whole thing was nothing, and that Daniel was the one with the problem. But what I did not see was how deliberate his silence had become. He was not sulking the way he used to after small fights. He was studying me, or at least that is what I realized later. He stayed polite, but never playful. He started keeping his phone with him at all times. He spent more time in the guest room on his laptop. I told myself he was just brooding, but in reality he was doing something I never expected. The cliffhanger that closed that week was simple but chilling. One night after another quiet dinner, I went to the guest room to say goodnight. He closed the laptop too fast when I walked in. I asked what he was working on, and he said nothing important, just work. His voice was calm but cold. I laughed it off, called him secretive, and told him to grow up. He just looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, something unreadable, and said he was going to bed. That look stuck with me. It was not anger, it was not sadness, it was something else, something that made me uneasy without knowing why. Work became my escape after that night. I told myself Daniel was just in one of his moods, and that I needed space from his sulking. At the office, Gareth had started making himself noticed. He was 34, easygoing, the kind of man who leaned against a desk like he owned the room. When I stayed late, he stayed late too, and he always had some clever remark that made me laugh. He noticed little things, like when I wore my hair differently, or when I brought a new lunch container. Daniel never noticed things like that anymore. I told myself Gareth was just a friend, just harmless attention, but the truth was, I liked how he made me feel alive. One afternoon, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work to go over a report. I said yes without hesitation. It was not a date, I told myself. It was professional. At the cafe, we talked about everything except the report. He asked if I was happy at home, and I shrugged, saying Daniel was predictable, always tired, always quiet. Gareth smirked like he understood exactly what I meant. That little smirk burned in my mind long after I got home. Daniel asked why I was late. I said there had been extra work. He did not argue, but I saw his eyes flicker toward my phone when it buzzed with a message from Gareth. I snapped at him for snooping and told him he was paranoid. That was the start of my gaslighting. I told him if he trusted me, he would not be asking questions. I made him feel guilty for even suspecting me. That night in bed, he turned away from me without a word. I felt a mix of relief and annoyance. Relief because I thought I had won, annoyance because he would not fight back. Over the next few weeks, I leaned into the attention from Gareth more and more. Lunch breaks, inside jokes, even little text messages about silly things. Daniel noticed, of course. He asked again why I was distracted at dinner. I said he was imagining it. I told him he was making me feel like a prisoner in my own marriage. He went quiet again, and I rolled my eyes, telling him he needed therapy for his jealousy. My parents took my side when I complained. My mom said men always get insecure when women glow up. My dad said Daniel should be grateful I was still around. Their words gave me fuel to keep doing what I was doing. But Evelyn, his mother, saw through me. At a family gathering, she pulled me aside and said Daniel deserved better than constant ridicule. I brushed her off, saying she was too protective. But inside, I was irritated. She was the only one who dared challenge me. One evening, I made the mistake of leaving my laptop open while I went to put the kids to bed. When I came back, Daniel was sitting at the desk. The screen showed a half-written email from Gareth, playful and suggestive. Daniel closed it without saying a word and walked out of the room. My heart raced, but instead of apologizing, I went on the attack. I accused him of invading my privacy. I shouted that he had no right to look through my things. He just looked at me calmly and said he did not need to argue with me about it. That was worse than yelling. At least yelling meant he cared. His calm made me uneasy. That night, I told Clara on the phone that Daniel was losing it, that he was acting paranoid and crazy. She hesitated before saying, maybe I should think about how it looked from his side. I told her she was siding with him because she was jealous of me. She got quiet and changed the subject. I started to notice Clara pulling back after that, not answering my texts as quickly, avoiding long talks. It annoyed me, but I refused to admit it was my fault. Meanwhile, Gareth kept up the chase. He sent me memes. He asked about my day. He told me Daniel did not appreciate me. It was intoxicating. I convinced myself that Daniel was the problem, not me, that I deserved more than a man who sat silently at dinner tables. What I did not realize was that Daniel had stopped trying to defend himself for a reason. He was done arguing. He was collecting, watching, storing things in that laptop he kept close now. The cliffhanger came one Friday night. I came home late, claiming I had been finishing a project. Daniel was sitting in the living room with a stack of envelopes. He asked how work was. I said fine. He asked if I had anything I wanted to tell him. I laughed and said he was acting like a detective. He just nodded slowly, slid the envelopes into a drawer, and said nothing else. His silence was louder than any fight we had ever had. It chilled me, though I pretended not to notice. The barbecue was supposed to be fun, a chance to show off our house and remind everyone that Daniel and I were still a strong couple. I planned the whole thing, from the decorations in the yard to the menu that Daniel cooked, because of course, he always insisted he could do it better. I let him, because when guests praised the food, it still reflected on me. Friends, neighbors, even some of Daniel's co-workers showed up, along with my sister Clara and my parents. Evelyn came too, and I already knew she would be watching me like a hawk, ready to call out anything she thought was disrespectful. The sun was setting, the drinks were flowing, and people gathered in little groups across the yard. The kids ran around laughing, and I was laughing too, louder than anyone else because I wanted the spotlight. Daniel sat at the edge of a group, quiet as always, sipping his drink and nodding when someone tried to involve him. His silence irritated me, especially when I saw Gareth's name pop up in my phone earlier that day with a quick little message that made me smile. Compared to him, Daniel looked so dull. Someone cracked a joke about marriage, about how couples get too comfortable, and I seized the moment. I said loudly that Daniel was the king of comfort, that if laziness was a sport, he would have a medal. People chuckled politely, and Daniel's face went tight, but I didn't stop. I wanted more reaction, more laughter, and the wine was making me bold. I told another story about how my ex used to carry heavy grocery bags in both hands, while Daniel struggled with just one. That got a bigger laugh, even from Clara, and I felt powerful. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but stayed silent. The attention was on me, and I wanted to keep it. Then came the line that shattered everything. I laughed and said that my ex was a two-hand grip while Daniel was just one finger. The yard went quiet for a second before people forced awkward laughs. Clara froze, my parents looked down, and Evelyn's eyes went wide with fury. Daniel set down his plate carefully and stood up. He did not yell or make a scene. He just walked inside, calm and silent, leaving me standing there in the middle of everyone's forced laughter. I tried to wave it off, saying he was too sensitive, that it was only a joke, but the mood had shifted. The laughter was brittle now, conversations awkward. People looked at me like I had crossed a line. Later, after most guests had gone, Clara pulled me aside. She said I was cruel, and that Daniel had every right to be upset. I snapped at her that she was always on his side, that she should support her own sister. She shook her head and walked away. Evelyn, on the other hand, didn't hold back. She told me in front of my parents that I had humiliated her son and that one day I would regret it. My parents brushed it off, saying Daniel should learn to laugh, but Evelyn's words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. When I went inside, Daniel was in the guest room already. I asked him why he had embarrassed me by storming off. He said he was not the one who had embarrassed anyone. His voice was flat, his eyes distant. I tried to tell him he was making too big a deal out of nothing, that everyone laughed, that jokes were part of marriage. He just looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. That night, he moved a pillow and blanket permanently into the guest room. He didn't argue, didn't slam doors. He just created distance. I told myself it was childish, that he would come crawling back when he missed me, but days passed and he stayed in that room. The kids noticed. Maya asked why Daddy was sleeping in the other room. I laughed it off, saying he snores too much, but the look on Daniel's face when she asked made my stomach twist. It wasn't anger, it was resignation. At breakfast, he stayed polite, helped Jonah with his cereal, and avoided looking at me. When I tried to start a fight, to push him into reacting, he stayed calm. That calmness unnerved me. It felt like he was slipping further and further away, but I refused to admit I was wrong. I told myself he was sulking, that I had to stay strong and not let him manipulate me into apologizing. The cliffhanger came one night after the kids were asleep. I knocked on the guest room door and told him I wanted to talk. He opened it just enough to look at me. I asked if he was planning to stay in there forever. He said maybe. His voice was even, his expression unreadable. Then he shut the door softly, leaving me in the hallway with nothing but silence. That silence was worse than any argument we had ever had. A week after the barbecue, I decided to meet Clara and a couple of friends for dinner at a restaurant downtown. I needed to vent, to explain my side, because I felt like everyone had been unfair to me that night. I wanted people to agree that Daniel was the one overreacting, that I had only been joking. Clara was quiet when I arrived, but our friends leaned in, curious. I told them Daniel had been sulking ever since, hiding in the guest room, refusing to act like an adult. I painted myself as the victim, saying it was exhausting to live with someone so fragile. I said a marriage needed humor and honesty, and if Daniel couldn't handle that, then maybe he was too weak for me. At first, a few laughed politely, but then the mood shifted. One friend asked if maybe I had gone too far, if humiliating him in front of family and neighbors wasn't exactly harmless. Clara sat there with her arms crossed, looking at me like she didn't even recognize me. I rolled my eyes and said people were being dramatic, that Daniel wasn't a child, that he needed to man up. I even said real men didn't run to their mothers every time their wives teased them. That got a few uneasy looks. Clara finally spoke and said I sounded cruel, that I wasn't taking any responsibility. I snapped back that she was jealous of me, that she'd always resented how I got more attention than her. She shook her head and didn't argue. That silence from her was worse than yelling. Later that night, I called my mom and told her about the dinner. She told me Daniel was too sensitive, that men these days couldn't take a joke. My dad just grunted and said I shouldn't worry, that Daniel would get over it. Their support made me feel better, at least for a moment, but Evelyn was another story. She had called Daniel after the barbecue and apparently told him he should protect himself. I only knew this because Clara let it slip. The idea of Evelyn filling his head with poison made me furious. I told myself she had always wanted him with someone else, someone quiet and obedient. I dismissed it, convinced Daniel was just sulking and would eventually return to normal. But things were different at home. He was polite but detached, caring for the kids, keeping the house running, but not engaging with me. He took long phone calls outside, came back inside calm but unreadable. His calmness was unbearable. I tried to provoke him, making little comments about how Gareth actually appreciated me, how I had options if Daniel didn't step up. He didn't bite. One evening, I told him directly that he was making me look bad, that people thought he was pathetic for not standing up to me. He said nothing, just gave me that flat look and walked away. I hated it. I wanted him to shout, to fight, to prove he still cared. Instead, he grew quieter, like he had already made up his mind. Then came the moment that shook me. I was at the restaurant with Clara again, trying one last time to get her on my side. I told her Daniel was probably talking to a lawyer just to scare me, that he wasn't strong enough to do anything real. She didn't answer, but I could see pity in her eyes. I hated it. And then it happened. As I was leaving the restaurant with Clara and my parents, a man approached me in the parking lot. He was holding a large envelope. He asked my name, handed me the envelope, and walked away without a word. I froze, heat rising in my chest. My parents asked what it was, and I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were legal documents Daniel had filed, custody papers, financial disclosures, even a list of evidence attached. My mother gasped, my father cursed under his breath, and Clara just stared at me with wide eyes. I laughed nervously and said it was nothing, just a scare tactic, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. In that moment, I realized Daniel hadn't been sulking at all. He had been preparing. That calm, that silence, it was never weakness. It was planning. And now the plan was unfolding right in front of me. The morning after I got the envelope, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers, while Daniel moved around the house like it was any other day. He made breakfast for the kids, packed their lunches, kissed them on the head, and sent them off to school without a word to me. When the door closed, I slammed the papers on the table and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. He looked at me calmly and said he was doing what needed to be done. I laughed in his face and told him he was being ridiculous, that no judge would take him seriously over a couple of jokes. He didn't argue. He walked to the counter, picked up a folder, and laid it in front of me. Inside were printed text messages, screenshots of emails, and even a timeline of my late nights at work, matched against charges from coffee shops and restaurants near my office. He had receipts, bank statements, even comments Clara and Evelyn had made about my behavior. My stomach dropped. I accused him of spying, of stalking me, of trying to twist everything. He said quietly that he wasn't twisting anything. He was simply gathering facts. I tried to laugh it off, saying Gareth meant nothing, that it was just fun, harmless attention. Daniel's face didn't move. He told me Gareth's name was already in the file, that his lawyer had advised keeping everything documented. That word, lawyer, made me freeze. I asked if he was really going that far. He said yes, that he had already spoken with one, and that the next step was protecting the kids and his finances. I shouted that he was destroying our family over bruised pride. He said I had done that myself. The calmness in his voice cut deeper than if he had screamed. I told him he was weak, that a real man would fight for his wife instead of hiding behind paperwork. He told me he wasn't fighting for me anymore. He was fighting for the children and for his own peace. I tried to flip it, telling him he was traumatizing Maya and Jonah by making such a cold move. He said the children deserved stability and not to be raised in a house where their father was mocked and their mother lied. He said the court would see that. I called my mother in tears, expecting comfort, but she went quiet after I told her what was in the folder. My father muttered that I had pushed too far. Clara refused to even take my call. I realized my circle was shrinking fast. That evening, Evelyn stopped by. She didn't even look at me. She hugged Daniel, kissed the kids, and told him she was proud of him. When she left, I accused him of turning everyone against me. He said I had done that myself. I spent that night pacing the house, trying to come up with ways to turn the story back on him. I told myself he was overreacting, that I could still spin this, but when I looked at the folder again, with its neat tabs and highlighted notes, I felt a fear I had never felt before. Daniel wasn't just reacting, he was executing a plan. A few days later, he sat me down at the table. He said he was filing for majority custody. He said he had documented my late nights, my relationship with Gareth, and the way I spoke about him in front of the children. He said the lawyer believed it showed a pattern of disrespect and instability. I tried to argue that none of it mattered, that Gareth and I had never gone too far, but Daniel said it didn't matter if we had or hadn't. The perception, the evidence, was enough. I told him he was tearing us apart. He said I had already done that. His words were calm, final, and terrifying. That night, I lay awake in the bed alone, realizing that for the first time since I had started all of this, I wasn't in control. He had taken the power I thought I had, and he had done it quietly, legally, and completely. The cliffhanger came when he walked past me with the kids' overnight bags. He told me he was taking them to Evelyn's for the weekend. I asked if he was coming back. He said he would return for his things. Then he left me standing in the doorway, clutching the empty folder, with nothing but silence behind him. The day of the court hearing felt unreal. I had convinced myself it would be nothing, that a judge would laugh at Daniel's so-called evidence and send us home to work things out. I wore my best dress, made sure my makeup was perfect, and told myself that charm would carry me through. Daniel arrived in a plain suit, calm as ever, his lawyer beside him with a thick binder. When the judge began, Daniel's lawyer laid everything out. Screenshots of texts with Gareth, timestamps of late nights, bank charges, even statements from Clara and Evelyn about my constant humiliations. There were notes about the barbecue, about the two-hand grip, one-finger comment, about the way the kids had asked why Daddy slept in another room. Every page felt like a knife. I wanted to interrupt, to shout that it was exaggerated, that it was all jokes taken out of context, but my own lawyer whispered for me to stay quiet. When it was my turn, I tried to explain. I said Daniel was too sensitive, that I never meant harm, that everyone knew I was joking. The judge's expression didn't change. When I said Gareth meant nothing, the lawyer pointed to the tone of the texts and the frequency of our meetings. When I said Daniel was just sulking, the lawyer pointed to the timeline that showed his silence wasn't sulking, but documenting. Every excuse I gave was met with another page of proof. My parents were in the back of the courtroom. My mother avoided my eyes. My father stared at the floor. Clara didn't come at all. Evelyn sat straight, her hands folded, a small, satisfied look on her face. The kids stayed with a sitter because the court said they shouldn't be present. When the ruling came, it felt like the ground disappeared. Daniel was granted primary custody. I would have visitation but not control. The financial division cut deep too. The house would be sold, assets split, but Daniel's accounts were protected because he had documented everything before I touched them. I tried to argue, to say it was unfair, that I was their mother and deserved more. The judge said plainly that my actions had consequences and that the children's stability came first. Daniel didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded, accepted the ruling, and walked out with his lawyer. I followed him into the hallway, demanding to know if this was really what he wanted, if he was happy destroying his family. He turned to me, his face calm but his eyes cold, and said it was not him who had destroyed it. Then he walked away. My parents left without saying much. My mother gave me a quick hug. My father patted my shoulder, but neither defended me. Evelyn didn't even look at me as she passed, holding Maya and Jonah's backpacks in her hands like they already belonged to her son's new life. I went home alone that evening. The house felt hollow. Half the closets were empty, drawers cleared, the kids' toys gone from the living room. On the counter sat Daniel's house key, laid flat on a note that said nothing, just the key, like a final statement. I walked from room to room in silence, touching the walls, the furniture, the spaces where the kids used to leave their mess. The air felt cold. For the first time, I realized there was no fight left to win. Daniel hadn't yelled, hadn't begged, hadn't stormed out in rage. He had simply taken his time, built his case, and left with everything that mattered. I had laughed at him, mocked him, told the world he was weak, and now he had shown me just how strong silence could be. The story didn't end with a dramatic blow-up or reconciliation. It ended with the sound of the front door closing and the house echoing back at me. I was alone, holding nothing but the weight of my own words. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching. You are watching. You are watching. You are watching. You are watching.